Just going on from that. So I have a client who is a community football club, and the committee are all accessing the data from different computers at home. The main system that we use is a system where all the players register. So they give their personal data to us through this system. Is the company that runs that system, should they be managing the risk? Or do we have to make sure that we are managing the risk of all those committee members so that we're not exposed, my client is not exposed? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, how does that work?
I guess there's different layers of risk there. I mean, because you contract them to perform a service for you. So there's that contractual obligation. What are they doing? Are they fulfilling that for you? And whether you've got cyber breach conditions in that contract, I don't know. All right. One would expect that as a professional IT provider, they're going to honour their delivery of a professional IT service. However, if it's silent, well, there's more exposure to you than them. But then there's also what is the arrangement for the collection of the data versus the storage of the data. And do you actually need to hold all that data that you're asking? So you ask yourself, because you want to de-risk the data, so if it just becomes a name and an address, that's less than a whole range of other personal driver's licenses and Medicare numbers and all that sort of stuff. Medicare numbers, not Medibank numbers. And so you've actually got to do a bit of an audit. Okay, so what are we asking and why? Why do we want this information? Because a lot of it, well, every club asks for it, but why do you need it? And then you say, well, what are we contracting out? So what are they assuming? But then you still, at the end of the day, the player registers with you, and they're going to, if they have their personal information used elsewhere, they will hold initially you accountable. And then you've got to look contractually, how can we share this problem with somebody else? But it'll be held to you first.
So who does the audit? So we've looked at our systems and we know that there's risk there. Do we get Luke to come and do an audit of our IT? But how do we do that with all those different computers?
The challenge that you have is that you're using a third-party vendor in a subscription-based model. So it's no different to your Xeros and your Microsoft 365, right? When you sign up with them and when you buy licenses through them, you enter an agreement with that vendor. For example, right, prior to, say, 5 or 6 years ago, anything that was in 365 was stored overseas. Okay, and this issue was raised when a number of our non-for-profit clients in certain industries, they have a legal obligation that their data must be stored in Australia. Whether it's in a box in the desk or whether it's on servers in Australia, it had to be Australian-based. And they weren't aware that it wasn't. So they were very hesitant to move. That's now changed. So with Microsoft, you now buy it from Australia, it's stored in Australian data centres. So that's very clearly now described. And so a lot of these software vendors, subscription-based, are improving their terms and conditions and making the transparency very, very clear. It's also worthwhile having the conversation with them. Where's the data kept? Are you backing it up? Because, a lot of people don't realise that anything that's stored in 365 is not actually backed up, right? It's actually a clause in the contract. Microsoft has no responsibility for backup, right? They have a responsibility to keep it there, and provided you don't delete it or it doesn't get corrupted, it stays there forever. But the moment you delete it or it gets corrupted, that's it. So there are third-party backup systems for 365. So things like that, understanding that, right? So, when you, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, Xero and some of these accounting systems, they provide backups of their systems. Microsoft doesn't. And many people know that, right? So it's worthwhile having those conversations with those vendors. Okay, where do you keep your data? Do you back it up? No, we don't back it up. You have to have some sort of backup. In terms of everybody accessing the system remotely, you've got that BYOD issue again, and they're obviously going to a browser, they're accessing a cloud-based system. So there are ways to tighten that a little bit, but because it's their own device, you can only go so far. You've got to look at the back-end stuff, where they're logging into. Is it secure? Is there a way for them to have their laptop breached and then get into that system? Do we have MFA and other multi-factor authentication, other types of protection on the login screen before they get to the data? So there are some measures that can be taken, and a lot of these vendors now are making multi-factor authentication a mandatory requirement, right? Something as simple as 2 steps to get in, Some of them are even going a third step, right? Really, really important to have. And if it's not activated on your accounts, activate it. Activate it now, because it's another buffer, right? So just some of those steps, go through some of those steps. Using their own devices, you can't control that unless you start issuing them devices. But you can take some steps, after that process from the login page back. How's it being protected? Where's it being stored?
Thank you.
And I guess just on that as well, Amanda, it won't be a cyber hack or a cyber incident, but you've also got to have your protocols in place to say, what could a team manager actually get access to? Because they could actually have legitimate access and take information and use it personally. So what's your protocol around that?